I don't think there's much more to say about the period after the 1968. The low point in enrollment was probably reached about 77, 78, 79, when we were lucky if we commissioned 9 or 10 each year. The unit was on probation with the Navy Department because it was not turning out enough ensigns and second lieutenants. And then gradually, thanks to certain commanding officers, and the recent ones really have been outstanding, the unit gradually began to rise again, so that we got off probation. There was no question with regard to its survival. On the other hand, and I don't have any crystal ball with me, and crystal balling is not the prerogative of a historian, there is trouble ahead. The number of scholarships, as you are aware, is being reduced and may be further reduced. And whether in this day and age, without the spur of a peacetime draft, and I see no possibility of a peacetime draft being reinstituted, whether a high tuition, academic demanding institution like Northwestern can continue to attract the ablest among the undergraduates for the Navy program, I think this is a matter that only time will tell. I think that's all I really want to say about it, so that may I leave you with this thought. The history of the unit is a proud one. I think not only of the people who gave their lives in the Second World War. There were at least 2 midshipmen in my day, both Marines, both Marine aviators, who gave their life in the Vietnam War. One of them was Chuck Porterfield, class of 61. The other was Dale Luster, class of 62. And I believe, Jerry, that we now have a medal for Dale Luster that's been presented the last couple of years at the spring review. My own belief is simple, that the program is a worthy one. It is one that should be maintained, and for 3 very simple reasons. The program is good for the nation, the program is good for the university, but most important of all, the program is good for those who voluntarily choose to participate in it. Thank you very much. I hope now that we can have discussion, and if I can, I'm going to drag it out of someone. I think it would be helpful if whoever has a question, and maybe we may have more than one, you would identify yourself. I know the first speaker all too well, but nevertheless, if you would sing out your question, I'll repeat it so everybody else can hear, and wait. Brian?
Midshipman, second class Donaldson. Professor, could you elaborate on what the effects of the daily Northwestern had during the period of 1968?
Mm-hmm. The question by Midshipman second class Donaldson is, what effect did the daily articles have on the local scene during that period? I think considerable, to Brian. I don't know how many minds they persuaded, but the publicity was constant, and the publicity was unfavorable. Every person who could stir up 5 or 6 fellow undergraduates to mount a protest would get good publicity. There was very little publicity on the side of the unit and what it was doing. And this was true in reporting the debates in the faculty. If someone got up in the faculty and sounded off against the Vietnam War and how we were training, the term was hired killers at that time. The midshipmen were referred to as hired killers. If the university was doing that, that would get the publicity. Now, again, without drawing too many analogies, I think you may recall within the last year or so where there have been comparable protests it didn't take more than 10 or 15 people to march around the Rock and someplace else to make the headlines of the Daily in recent times. Now, what the sum effect of this was, I don't know, but I would say this: there was always the danger, particularly among the faculty, that if this protest, if these possible disruptions kept going on and on, maybe even if the unit was a good unit, throw the rascals out so we can have peace. You know, that's killing the messenger because of the message that he brings. But I often fear that that very well might happen. And to the extent that the Daily fed the unfavorable publicity and exaggerated the protests, I think that is true. Well, I planted that one, so that doesn't count. Casey?
Sir, Richard the third class, Cameron Smith.
No.
Is it true that during the Vietnam War there were like smoke bombs thrown into units and stuff like that?
Yes and no. There was constant fear. There was constant fear. Oh, excuse me. That Midshipman Third Class Smith asked whether there were smoke bombs thrown in the unit during the Vietnam period. There was at least one major episode in which people did get into the offices in Lund Hall, and as the term went there, trash. Commander Holland will remember this. In 1968, the Spring Review was rained out so that the award of medals was given in Tech Auditorium. In 1969, the weather was fair, but people thought that Deering Meadow was not an appropriate place to hold a review. So the review was transferred for the first time indoors to what was then McGaw Hall. And the protesters were out in force. The Chicago television stations were there, or their cameras were there. People lined up outside. I remember that I went through the underground tunnels to get in, but I think what I remember most was that during the review itself, there were a group who were pounding on the door in the back of McGaw, making a considerable amount of noise and so forth. And Bill, am I correct in thinking there was no review in 70?
I don't recall one, sir.
You don't recall one?
That's right.
Yeah, I think that's true. They called the one off in 70 because it came at the very worst time. Probably the climax of the protests were in May of 1970 when the Nixon administration invaded Cambodia, and simultaneously there was a shooting at Kent State and Jackson State. And for a period of time, the university virtually shut down. And to hold a review on Deering Meadow a couple of weeks after that was rather, shall we say, unwise. And my recollection, as Commander Hollins, is that there was no review that year.